Okay, done.
Hi guys, this is Terry with Futures.io. It is my pleasure to welcome Chris Kaiser for today's webinar, the EasyLanguage ABCs, First Steps in Mastering TradeStation Programming. During the webinar, please feel free to type your questions into the questions box. We'll do our best to answer them at the end of the event. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do us a favor and give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the webinar. And as always, please feel free to share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us a lot. You can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter with @Futures.io. Without further delay, I'll hand it over to Chris.
Okay, thank you, Terry, for this introduction. And thank you and Mike for hosting the webinar today. And of course, thank all of you guys attending or watching the recording on YouTube. As Terry said, my name is Chris Kaiser, and today we want to take the first steps in mastering TradeStation programming together.
You should have the pop-up to share.
Okay, so sorry guys. Again, my name is Chris Kaiser, and today we want to take the first steps in mastering TradeStation programming together. If you frequent Futures.io, you might know me as ABCTG. That is the username I go by there, and the name is just an acronym for the website that I'm running, which is abctradinggroup.com. I'm located in Hamburg, Germany, and you can see the harbor line of Hamburg here on this image with a new Philharmonic concert hall in the background. And I'm an independent software developer, long-term TradeStation user, and registered EasyLanguage specialist. But besides working with TradeStation, I also work with multicharts, multicharts.net, NinjaTrader, and other platforms, and provide programming and consulting for my clients based on their requirement and tailored to their needs. I'm not in the market of selling indicators or strategies, and I don't sell any trading education either. So I just do custom work. And from talking with other traders or from reading forum posts that deal with people who start with coding, I experience or see a lot of similar results. Oftentimes the person reaches a certain point where they are so frustrated that they give up their efforts, and this is usually caused when they start with something overly complex without having at least the basic knowledge of the language that they work with. And when this is the case, frustration is understandable, when in fact coding shouldn't be frustrating. It shouldn't be that hard. It actually should be creative and fun. And after all, the program is just doing what you told it to do, and where else do you have that, right? You can think about programming almost like following a recipe in cooking. You sit down before you start with your program, you think about what do I want to accomplish, write a plan, write a flow chart maybe, and then you follow this recipe by combining elements of the language that you use, and you form your program following your plan that you outline up front, and then your trading platform in this case will just evaluate your code and do exactly as you told it to do. To avoid you some frustrations, I can't spare you a bit of theory today, but we'll also take a look at actual code examples within TradeStation for indicators and strategies. But please understand that this code is only meant to demonstrate certain behavior within EasyLanguage and within TradeStation, and it's not intended to be used for actual trading, it's just for demonstration. And having said this, let's take a look at some of the points that we want to cover today. Okay, so to pick it up from where we left, we will take a look at some code examples of indicators and strategies within TradeStation, and please understand that this code is just meant to demonstrate certain behavior, and having said this, let's take a look at some actual things that we want to discuss today. During this brief webinar, we will take a look at some of the basics of EasyLanguage. We will deal with legacy EasyLanguage, which means the original EasyLanguage without the additional object-oriented concepts that were introduced a few years ago. One reason being, when starting out especially, it makes sense to focus on legacy EasyLanguage to get a good understanding of the concepts, and we will clarify what EasyLanguage is, go over some basic elements, and I'll show you some good coding habits and tips and tricks that I use in my daily work. And I believe with following those, it simplifies my trading or my programming. And we will do all this within the TradeStation development environment, which is the place where you write all your codes. And at the end of the webinar, I'll give you some, in my opinion, useful resources and share my opinion about how to learn EasyLanguage best. And as you heard me mentioning EasyLanguage a couple of times now already, let's take a look at what this actually is. EasyLanguage is a programming language. It has different elements and the syntax like you would have in a regular language where you have a grammar and vocabulary. It dates back all the way to the mid-80s when a strategy testing platform came out that had a programming language that was designed specifically for traders. And the philosophy behind the design of this language was that it should be easy to learn, almost English-like, easy to program with, so that you could use it without a programming background, and it accomplished that by using a language that traders are already familiar with. And when you look at the second line from the bottom, you see an actual command from a code that would issue a long entry when the close of the bar is greater than the open. So I guess we can all agree that this is very English-like, at least this command. And the TradeStation being around for such a long time, and also the EasyLanguage programming language that it provided resulted in a broad user base over the years, and that led other programs to adapt the programming language, and they became what you can call EasyLanguage friendly, meaning that they are able to understand or work with EasyLanguage to a degree. And examples are multi-charts, for example, OpenECry, Global Zen, but there are others as well. So there are many people using EasyLanguage actually. And even if you're not interested in writing complex new studies, some basic knowledge can also be helpful just in case you want to modify any built-in studies, for example, or add a feature to an existing study. That's where some basic knowledge can help you out as well. Okay, so now that you know what EasyLanguage is, let me show you some basic elements of the language. First of all, EasyLanguage is not case sensitive, meaning you can write your code in all caps or all lower cases. It's exactly the same for the platform. You have reserved words that could be considered the backbone of the language. You have user-defined elements like inputs that allow you to change parameters of your program when you apply it to a chart, for example. You probably, when you are familiar with TradeStation, know the format dialog that comes up when you apply a moving average, for example, to a chart. It usually allows you to set the length of the average and maybe the price that you want to smooth. All this is set via inputs. You have variables that hold calculation results within your code. You have functions that could be described as self-contained EasyLanguage code, and they provide a certain functionality. A lot of functions are built in TradeStation already. You have almost all standard indicators available as a function that you can use within your code. One good thing is that you don't have to know exactly how the function works. You can call it when you just know how to apply it. And besides using the built-in functions, you can also create new ones yourself. And I'll talk about that a little later. When you have your code written, it is evaluated from the top of the bottom in general within EasyLanguage. And whenever you want to include or exclude certain parts of the code, that's where conditional statements are helpful. For example, imagine you want to trade during certain hours of the day only, and you could accomplish that using conditional statements, and then you would check for your allowed times, and only if the current time falls within your allowed times, you would allow trades to be taken, and we'll take a look at that as well. When you write your code, you do all that within the TradeStation development environment, and that's also the place where the code gets verified by TradeStation. When you write code within EasyLanguage, you have to verify the code before you can apply it to a chart. And what this verification will do, it will not only check for any syntax errors within your code, it will also compile the code that you wrote within EasyLanguage internally into machine code that the TradeStation platform then will use. All this will happen in the background. You don't have to worry about that. As I can talk a lot about the theory here, I think it's even better if I show you things directly within the platform, and that's why let me bring the TradeStation platform up here that you should see now. And you can start the development environment directly from within TradeStation via the View and then Development Environment button. This will bring up the TradeStation development environment, and as I said, this is where the code is written. And when you see this demonstrational code that I prepared for today, you immediately notice that there are different parts of the code colored, some green parts, some blue parts, some maybe brown or magenta here. All this is done automatically from the development environment, showing you different elements of the syntax. And this is also the place where you can create new studies like functions, indicators, strategies. All that is done from within here. And when we go back to the different elements that are colored here, you see that some are blue, and TradeStation will color reserved words in blue. And as I said before, those can be considered the backbone of the language. They provide a specific action, or like return data, like the close, for example, here returns the close of a bar. A bit further down, you have reserved words that return the high and the low of a bar. You have other reserved words that are used for plotting something on the chart, for drawing trend lines, issuing buy or sell orders. There is no need to know them all. TradeStation has a great built-in help that you can use in case you're not sure what a reserved word is doing, for example. You can simply highlight that reserved word, and by clicking or pressing F1, TradeStation will come up with the built-in platform help, will give you an example, an explanation of this reserved word. So the platform will provide you with everything you need. It comes with a list of all the reserved words, and the same goes for all the built-in functions, so you have everything explained in there in case you run into any questions. Yeah, so that's a great way to look something up in case you're unsure. When you look at a basic code within EasyLanguage, you can find a certain structure, not always, but a lot of times the code will follow a certain structure. You have the declaration of inputs and variables on the top, like I'm showing here. Then doing calculations within the code, those are then stored within your variables. Those variables will then be used to evaluate expressions or conditions, and finally, based on the outcome of those evaluations, you would display a moving average plot, for example, or color it accordingly. You would issue orders. And so, as I said, on top, you start usually with declaring the inputs and variables. And you simply do that by telling the platform that now I want to declare one or more inputs. You would write the reserved word for inputs that tells the platform that now you will follow with a list of inputs, one or more. Then you type the name of the input, follow with a bracket, and within the bracket you set the default value for this input. And in case you only want to create one input, you would end with a semicolon here. Otherwise, you add a comma and start with the next input, and until you reach at the last input where you would end with a semicolon, because every statement within EasyLanguage will end with the semicolon. And the same goes for variables. You would tell the platform that you start with variables, then name your variables, define or initialize them with the first value, and end with a semicolon after the last variable. When it comes to inputs and variables, there can be 3 different types, and the type of an input or variable is determined by TradeStation based on whatever you write within the brackets here. You can have numeric inputs. Those are inputs that simply hold numbers. You can have Boolean inputs, meaning they can hold true or false. And you can have inputs that hold strings, and those are of type string. And for variables, it's exactly the same. And when it comes to naming your inputs and variables, you are pretty free in choosing a name that you see fit. You can use almost anything except start with a symbol or number, with the exception of the underscore. But, and this already brings us to some good coding habits, I would always suggest to use meaningful names when you name your inputs or variables. And by meaningful names, I simply mean choose a name that tells you why this variable or input exists, what it does, or where it is used, so you will have an easier time to find your way around the code. And to give you an example, if you look at the line 39 and line 41 here, both are almost, or both are doing the exact same computation. They appear to compute an exponential moving average, but the purpose of the calculation is not necessarily clear from line 39, but in my opinion, line 41, simply by using meaningful names for the variables, already almost talks to you, and you can see what is calculated within this line. And I'm suggesting to use those meaningful names because at the moment you write your code, everything is probably perfectly clear to you, but just imagine you come back after half a year or a year to a code that you wrote, you will likely have a much harder time to find your way around in case the variables are not named meaningful. And when you work with code and try to track down an issue, it's also, in my opinion, a lot easier or helpful to have meaningful names when you want to find out something that is not working within your code. And that's why I'm a big fan of using meaningful names. But with all the good coding habits that we will talk about today, the basic rule is do whatever you think works best for you, and nothing is carved in stone here. One last thing about the names, TradeStation will even let you use a reserved word for a variable name. So it would let you create a variable that you call high, which is the reserved word for receiving the bars high. And when we go to the verification now, TradeStation will check for any errors. It did not find an error here, but it will issue a warning, and it states that basically it's fine or it's okay with us creating a variable and calling it high. However, it tells us that now the reserved word high would not work anymore within this code here that we just wrote, and in case you want to access the high of the bar within this code, you would not be able to get the value of the high here, because whenever you write high now in the code, it would be the value that the variable just holds, and therefore I would always suggest not to use reserved words as variable or input names. You could use the underscore or maybe a small v in front of the name in case you wanted to name it closely to reserved word. But I would suggest to avoid any issues and try not to use reserved words as names. Another great feature, in my opinion, that EasyLanguage has is that you can easily, and you saw it already here, reference previous parse values of variables or reserved words, functions, even whole expressions, by simply adding square brackets to the reserved word or expression variable in the case of line 58. And the number within the square brackets will determine how many bars you look back from the current bar. And when we look at those lines here, we computed a midpoint up here. And here we basically compute the midpoint for the previous bar in this line as well. And in line 58, we simply ask for the value of the variable on the previous bar, and this will result in all three values here being equal. So using square brackets is a great way to access previous bars values without the need to recompute everything again and again. Once you computed it, you can once you computed it on a bar, you can easily go back to that bar and access this value. Now in magenta here we have functions, or TradeStation colors the functions in magenta, at least when the color scheme is set to the default colors. You are free to choose the coloring for reserved words and functions to whatever you like. And functions are, as I said before, self-contained EasyLanguage codes that you can call from all studies, even other functions, and they will provide a certain functionality, and they allow you to simplify your code or to add some clarity to your code in a way that you don't have to type in all the calculation for the average here in this example. For example, you can just call the function, and in case you're not sure about the function, you can again use the help file here. TradeStation will give you a detailed example of how to use it, and the same goes when you type in the name of the function, start with an opening bracket. It will tell you exactly what inputs are required, what you have to pass to the function, and what the function will then in turn return to you. In this case, it will, when you provide it with the price and the length, compute the moving average and provide you with the value of this moving average, and then you can use this within your code. TradeStation doesn't only have a lot of functions built in, you can also create functions yourself, and whenever you find yourself using certain code over and over again, you might want to consider creating a function out of it. Just because then you can call the function within the code. You will likely have to type less, so you have less potential of errors within your code, and you just have to maintain the code in one place within the function, and whenever you make a change to the function, all other studies that call the function will be automatically affected by the changes that you make to the function. So this is a great way to simplify your life as well. And it's also, as I said before, a good way to clear the code. Think about a signal that computes 10 different moving averages, just to say something. If you now would have to type 10 different calculations of the moving average, the code would get unnecessarily complex and would get harder to maintain. Here you would just have to call the functions 10 times, and this will help in reducing the potential of error, as I said, and it will also help with the readability of your code and make your life easier in turn. So, and that's what I like. The last thing of the theory here that we want to cover are conditional statements that allow you to change the flow of control within your code. And by that I mean, normally the code will be evaluated from top to the bottom, but sometimes you want to exclude a certain part, and this can be done within with if-then statements. The if-then statement would evaluate the conditional check or the expression within the if-then. In this case here, it would check if the variable midpoint on the current bar is greater than the variable's value midpoint on the previous bar, and only if that is the case it would issue an alert. But you are free to execute any EasyLanguage statement here after the if-then, and you would end the statement with a semicolon. As the if-then statement only allows you to check one true-false expression and then execute one statement, you can expand this slightly by using the if-then-else statement that allows you to issue one statement in case the check is true, and the second statement in case the check up here is false. So the alert in line 86 would be triggered only if the midpoint is smaller than the midpoint in the previous bar, and in case the midpoint is greater or equal to the midpoint on the previous bar, then the alert in line 88 would be triggered. And as EasyLanguage considers this as one statement in total, it just requires a semicolon after the second statement. So the first statement here after the if-then would have to do without a semicolon. So this is a great way to change the flow of control within your code, or to have certain parts only to be executed when a condition is met, but you are limited to one statement only, and that's why EasyLanguage provides what you can call the if-then begin and end statement that allows you to execute an unlimited amount of statements within the begin and end block. Each has to end with a semicolon, so you can place all your statements that you want to be influenced by the outcome of the check in here. And similar to the if then else, you can also expand the if then else statement to an if then begin end, else begin end statement. And again, the whole statement ends with a semicolon, but each of the individual statements within your begin and end block have to end with a semicolon as well. Okay, so these are conditional statements, and we already talked about meaningful names. You see that the variable names here I use give some indication about what this variable might hold. You already saw me using comments here. I used them within this demonstrational code to provide you some additional information, but in general I would use comments to try to make my code a bit clearer, maybe give some additional explanation, or say what a certain code block does. In general, I try to talk with the code, so to speak. I try to write the code as clear as possible, and then maybe add a comment to add some additional clarification or tell what a certain code block is supposed to do. And this also helps me with finding my way around the code, especially when coming back after some time. And yeah, but again, you are absolutely free to name the to use comments to the best way that you see fit. You have two different forms of comments. One starts with 2 forward dashes. This simply spans from the 2 forward dashes after the until the end of the line that you started with the 2 dashes. And you have the ability to write comments over multiple lines using curly brackets. Those comments would start with an opening bracket and would span until you close it. So this comment could span over 2 or more lines. It could even span over just 1 line, and the code could continue here, which is not the case for the comment that starts with 2 forward dashes, because it will automatically go until the end of the line. So comments are a good way to add some additional clarification to help with readability. And the last of the good coding habits is also something that you already saw me using, but I haven't explained it so far. TradeStation would allow you to write the whole code within just 1 line. And while it's fine to do that, you might have a much harder time in case you would look for a misplaced bracket in here, for example. So that's why I like to use some tabs, white spaces. I like to indent the code to help me with the readability. At the same time, when you go overboard with the white spaces, you might probably also have a much harder time finding your way around. And that's why I like to use some moderate tabs. I try to string code blocks together. You see the begin and end block that belong together. Everything else starts with a tab, and then for the if then I do the same thing, and this helps me when I have begin end blocks that span over hundreds of code lines, which is not uncommon. In that case, I know what parts of the code belong together just by the way or by how they are indented. And as comments and white spaces will be removed in the version, in the compiled code that TradeStation uses internally. You don't have to worry that you will slow your code down. So again, I would suggest to use whatever you think works best for you, or whatever you think helps you. And if you think commenting every line of code is good, then no one should judge you. Again, do what you think helps you, what you think works best for you, and yeah, that's would be my advice here. Okay, so we've covered a lot of theory, and I don't want to bore you with too much theory. I think a little bit was necessary to build some foundation, and now we can use this theory and apply it to some actual code. We could, for example, take the built-in moving average indicator that TradeStation comes with by default, and we could add some coloring to this moving average, because now it would just be plotted with one color, and based on what we just learned, we can use or can add some inputs that will hold colors, and we can change the color of the moving average depending on how the variable, this variable here that holds the function's return value, how this variable relates to this variable's value on the previous bar. And when you think about what we just discussed, one way to accomplish this would be an if-then statement. In fact, we would combine two if-then-else statements together, and I would start by first saving this study under a different name. So we would save the study, and by that we would create a separate version of it, so you don't overwrite anything that is built in. And at the same time, whenever you update TradeStation, you wouldn't lose this modification, because TradeStation might override the built-in standard functions or standard indicators, but it won't override the modifications that you made under a different name. And that's why I'd save it. I used my handle that I use for code that I write, but you are free to use any name that you see fit. And I would expand this list of inputs by 3 more, one for the up color, which would be the color that we want to have when the average is greater than the average on the previous bar. We would create an input and call it down color. And the third input could be called unchanged color, for example. And we make this one yellow. So when we look at this code, we see that the variable's value is plotted here. Plot 1 is the reserved word for displaying this variable on the chart or within radar screen. You have up to 99 plots within TradeStation, so they would be called plot 1, plot 2, and so on up to plot 99. And this is the plot that we want to affect now with the with our coloring. And for that, TradeStation offers a reserved word that is called SetPlotColor, and we would start with checking that the variable average is greater than the average on the previous bar, and in that case we want to set the plot color. And when we start with an opening bracket here now, TradeStation will tell us what we have to do. We would have to specify the number of the plot that we want to affect. In this case, plot 1. So the 1 would go in here, and then the color that you want to have the plot in case this condition is true. And for an upsloping average, we want the up color. So plot 1 and up color would go in here. And now we have 2 more cases to go. One would be the exact opposite of that. So we can copy and paste this one, change the relational check here, and we would copy the down color in there. And now we could either write another if-then statement, or as we covered the greater and smaller relational check already, we could simply write an else here, and this would cover all remaining cases. And in this case, it's just the case where the average is equal to the average on the previous bar. And in that case, we'll give it the unchanged color. We are almost finished with the modification already. You see that the plot 1 here has a displace function. This is slightly different than the referencing of previous parse values that I showed you before. The displace will just shift the value of the plot to the left and to the right, and to avoid a situation where we have the plot misaligned from the coloring, we would have to add the displace here as well. In case the plot here would have no displace, so if it would be written like this, for example, we would not have to do this for the SetPlotColor as well, but as it has the displace option, I would suggest to do that, to add it here for SetPlotColor. And now we can verify the code, and you see that I made a mistake here. TradeStation tells us that it expects a semicolon, and it simply expects the semicolon because I forgot to add an end. I forgot to add an else statement in front of this if. We could write the code like this, so have this as one statement and the if then else as one statement. This would verify okay, but we could also combine all 3 together with one else here, and this will verify as well. Okay, now we've modified this indicator. Let's apply it to a chart. You should see a daily chart of the YM's floor session now, and we could go to Insert Indicator, go to the indicator we just created. Now you see the format dialog box I talked about briefly earlier. You have the inputs here that you can change. We have the new colors that we added. And let's make the line slightly bigger and apply it to the chart, and you see that now it changes color based on the slope. And when you compare this to the study the way it was before, you see that this has just one color, and the study that we modified is now able to display 3 different colors. So that's a great way to change something, to modify something by with just a few lines of code. And another thing that I wanted to show you is a great way of finding out what is going on within your code when you write code, and I have a strategy written here that would simply issue a long entry when one moving average crosses above the other. So it's very straightforward, and they do the opposite when the moving average crosses below each other. And now let's say I made a mistake here by using the same input, the same length input for both averages, so they would always be the same and could never cross. So when I apply the built-in study for that displays 2 moving averages now, because I can't plot directly out of strategies within TradeStation. So I would add this built-in study that helps me seeing where the moving averages cross. And when I apply the strategy that I created now, I would expect them to show entries and exits. Of course, as I said before, they don't, because the moving averages are exactly the same. And now I would have to track down what is wrong within my code. And for that, you might have seen me post on Futures.io that I suggest using the print statement whenever someone has a problem, and I like to use the print statement to find out what is going on. And here we could start with expanding the if-then statements to give us the ability to add one additional statement here within the if-then block. In this case, we would add a print. This is the reserved word for printing out values to the TradeStation print log, and I'll show you where this is located in a minute. I would simply use a built-in function that allows me to format the TradeStation date format into something that is more user-friendly, as it follows our date format. And then I would add some simple text telling me this is the upcross, and I'll add a similar statement down here for the downcross. And I would do this here first to see if the crossovers are actually evaluated. And when I verify the code now and it is without errors, it will automatically be recalculated. And when I switch back to the chart here, I would see the print statements here within the print log. When the print log is not up, you can enable it on the View EasyLanguage print log. So you just have to check it and it comes up. And now I would know that the cross conditions are not evaluated. So maybe those are wrong, but when I check the code here, they appear to be correctly formulated or correctly written. So the next thing I would check is if the, or I would look at the actual values of the variables here. So I would add some text here telling me this is the variable's value. Then I would print the actual value of the variable, and I would do the same thing for the second variable. Verify the code, and now we would have to see print statements because this print is not within any condition. If there is no print statement now, this would mean our code is not executed, and we would have to find out why. But here we have print statements now, and you see that the value of the variables is exactly the same on every bar, so no wonder there is no crossover. And of course we already know why, but in case we wouldn't know, we would have now come closer to the cause of the problem, and we would now either check if the function is wrong maybe, but here I'm using a built-in function, so I'm assuming this is working correctly, and I would look at the way that I call the function if I made a mistake there, and then I would probably see that I used the same input for the moving averages, and then therefore they couldn't cross. And when we correct this, verify the code again, we see entries and exits now following every crossover. So this is a great way, in my opinion, to find out what is going on under the hood of your code or within your code when the syntax of your code is without an error, but it's still not doing what you want it to do. And that's where the print statement is very helpful. Another thing that I like to do is I like to visualize what is going on within code, and you can do this with plot statements, for example. Unfortunately, as I said before, you can't plot within strategies, but you can convert your strategy or copy and paste strategy parts into an indicator, and then you can, for example, plot the moving averages, or you could plot, set a plot to a value of +1, for example, when there is a crossover, and set it to -1 when there is a cross under. And these are also great ways to visualize what is going on. And with those, the print statement and the plot of internal values, you have two very good tools in your toolbox to help you finding out what is going on and tracking down any problems that your code might have. Okay, so the duration of today's webinar did not allow me to cover all of EasyLanguage's elements, of course, but let's switch back over to the presentation here, and I'll give you some resources that I think can help you or are useful in case you want to reread some of the things we covered today, or if you want to expand what we talked about today. I will post the links to the resources into the webinar thread tomorrow, and I'll also include my notes and my codes that I prepared, so you can download them from there. TradeStation publishes what they call the EasyLanguage Essentials PDF. This is exceptionally well-written PDF in my opinion. It covers all of the basics, and it's a good start and a good read when you are interested in learning EasyLanguage. They publish a PDF with all the functions and reserved words, but in my opinion this is a little bit outdated, so you can use the built-in online help, or you could download the help that we briefly looked at and use that, as it's more up to date. The official TradeStation forum is a great resource. They have a great wiki. They are restricted to clients though, but Futures.io in my opinion is a good reference. You can always ask there. There are knowledgeable people there. And when you start out and want to learn EasyLanguage, one suggestion that I could make you is that you learn best when you apply things, when you code, even if it appears to be hard from time to time. When you start simple, start with indicators, don't jump to signals right away, start with indicators, learn the basics, even, and I can understand it, you usually want to get to signals right away, but take some time, learn the basics, and then get more complex. Start with legacy EasyLanguage. There are also a lot of courses on the net. I'll have some lessons on my blog, on my website, that deal with legacy EasyLanguage. But yeah, the best thing is to code. Think about something that you want to code and then code it. Ask in forums. Don't be afraid. One of the first comments that I received when I asked about a code years ago was a code that I wrote. One of the first comments was, "What a wild piece of code." So don't get discouraged by that. You can do it, I'm sure of that. Okay, so as we approach the end of the presentation, let's summarize some of the things that we talked about. We learned what EasyLanguage is and where it is used. We went over some of its basic elements. We covered some good coding habits and 2 methods to find out what's going on within your code, and both those good coding habits and the print and plot to find out problems are things that I use on a day-to-day basis to simplify my programming life, and I think you can benefit from them as well. If you want to contact me, you can do that via my website, abctradinggroup.com. There is a contact form on there, but you can also reach me through Futures.io, send me a PM there, or as I read almost all EasyLanguage related threads on Futures.io, if you post there, I'll probably read it as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for attending today. I apologize for the mess that we had up front. And with that, I'd like to turn back to Terry in case there are further questions.
Okay, there's just a couple of questions, and we got a few minutes, so we'll take those. Can you write your own functions in EasyLanguage?
Yes, you can. You can create functions yourself, and then you can define what this function should return. It can return one or more values. Yeah, it's absolutely possible.
Can you give us some of the key differences between EasyLanguage and C#, and why did you choose to become an expert in EasyLanguage as opposed to other programming languages?
Well, I first got into contact with EasyLanguage almost 15 years ago or so. I think NinjaTrader wasn't even around at that time. It just seemed natural. I mean, it was one of the most popular platforms at that time. And since then, I have expanded my work towards using C# as well, but I still like EasyLanguage for its simplicity, and you are able to develop things usually a lot quicker within EasyLanguage compared to C#, simply because you just have to write less code, in my opinion at least.
Okay. Are there any limitations of EasyLanguage, or whatever you can think of you can create, i.e. access a database or online data?
I would say it has limitations like all platforms have limitations. So you are able to create external DLLs, and I would say I can walk around almost all limitations, but of course there are some within the platform. For example, if the platform doesn't provide some data that you require, those are harder to come by, those limitations. But yeah, I think there are some limitations, as any platform will have them.
Okay. How does EasyLanguage compare to NinjaScript in expressiveness, power, or ease of use?
NinjaScript being C#, or
I believe so. He doesn't specify.
Well,
yes. In terms of C#.
C# has the power of the .NET framework and brings in a lot, but TradeStation did a great thing a few years ago with introducing object-oriented EasyLanguage, which we didn't deal with today to avoid unnecessarily confusions, but this allows for a lot of things that weren't possible before. But I mean, it really depends on what someone wants. If you are already familiar with C#, then NinjaTrader or multicharts.net might be a good choice. Yeah, this is always a matter of personal preference, in my opinion.
Okay.
One should compare the languages and the platforms, and then choose whatever he or she feels most comfortable with.
Okay. Do you prefer TradeStation over multicharts?
Not necessarily. It depends on what I want to do. I use both. Both have things I like about them. Until a few years ago, I would say that multicharts was almost running circles around TradeStation, but since then TradeStation has done a great job, in my opinion, with the addition of the object-oriented EasyLanguage, and before it was hard to, for example, create strategies that, or you couldn't combine non-time-based data streams on charts. Like you could not create a volume chart, for example, and then add to this chart a second data stream that would also be volume. It's still not possible, but now you can load the second data stream internally in the code, and so those are things that are possible in multi-charts directly in EasyLanguage, or in TradeStation you can code it now. And for the work I do, I choose whatever the client wants, or in case he's open to suggestions, I would suggest the platform that would work best for the project. So I like them both, I would say.
Okay. Well,
one thing.
Yes.
Sorry. One thing regarding multi-charts is that you can own the platform, which is not possible with TradeStation. On the other hand, with TradeStation, you are able to get the platform for free when you do it, when you use TradeStation as a broker and do a certain amount of round turns per month. I think 10 or so will get you the platform for free.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions for today. Thank you for the webinar, the information, and most importantly, your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And all the best to you, Terry, and all the best to you attendees.
Absolutely. Thank you.